I fell down my own staircase on a Tuesday morning, and the person who found me wasn't my son. It was my neighbor, a woman I barely knew, who noticed my car hadn't moved in 2 days. The ambulance came. The surgery came. And while I was unconscious in the ICU with a fractured hip and a bleeding brain, my son was posting photos of himself and his wife at a vineyard in Napa Valley, glasses raised, smiling for the camera. The caption read, "Finally unplugging. No phones, no drama, just us." I saw those photos when I woke up, and that's when I understood that my son hadn't failed to come. He had chosen not to. Before you hear what happened next, I need you to know something. I am 68 years old. I spent 31 years as a registered nurse. I have held the hands of people taking their last breaths. I have kept my composure in rooms where families were falling apart. I am not a woman who falls to pieces. But what I discovered in the weeks after that fall nearly broke me. Not the hip, not the surgery. What nearly broke me was the reason my son had already stopped thinking of me as someone worth coming home to. My name is Margaret. I have lived in the same house in Asheville, North Carolina for 22 years. My husband Robert passed 4 years ago, quietly, in his sleep, which is the way he would have wanted it. He was a carpenter and a churchgoer, and the most decent man I ever knew. After he died, I kept the house. It was ours, and I wasn't ready to let it go. 3 bedrooms, a vegetable garden in the back, and a staircase that I had climbed 10,000 times without incident, until the morning I didn't. My son is 42. He works in real estate development in Charlotte. He married a woman named Vanessa about 6 years ago, and they have a son together, Tyler, who is 8 and the light of my world. After Robert died, I tried to stay present in their lives. I called on Sundays. I drove to Charlotte for birthdays. I sent Tyler handwritten notes tucked inside books I thought he'd love. For the first year, my son returned my calls. For the second year, he returned most of them. By the 3rd year, I was mostly leaving voicemails that he answered with texts. Brief ones. "All good, Mom. Busy week. Talk soon. We never talked soon." I told myself it was the nature of modern life. I told myself he was building something, that Vanessa kept a full schedule, that Tyler had activities and they had obligations. I made every excuse a mother can make for a child she raised and loves, and cannot stop defending even when the evidence is piling up right in front of her. I should have stopped making those excuses long before a Tuesday morning in March. The fall happened at 7:15 a.m. I was carrying a laundry basket down the stairs, which I had done 1,000 times, and my foot caught the edge of the second step from the bottom. I went down fast and I went down hard. The basket flew. My hip hit the corner of the bottom step, and my head hit the hardwood floor. And then there was a sound I cannot describe, and then nothing at all. What I know about the next 36 hours I learned later from Dorothy, my neighbor across the street, who is 71 and sharp as a tack, and has lived in that house since her children were small. Dorothy noticed Wednesday morning that my porch light, which I turn off every morning at 7, was still on at 9. She noticed my car hadn't moved. She noticed the curtains in my front window, which I open every day after breakfast, were still closed. Dorothy did not hesitate. She tried my door, found it unlocked, and found me at the bottom of the stairs. The paramedics came. The hospital came. Emergency surgery for the fractured hip. A CT scan that showed bleeding around the brain from the impact, what they call a subdural hematoma, which required a second procedure. I was unconscious for 4 days. Dorothy gave them my son's number. She had it from a card I'd given her years ago, one of those emergency contact cards I made up after Robert died, because I was a nurse and I knew the value of being prepared. The hospital called my son 11 times over the first 2 days, left detailed voicemails each time. They reached Vanessa once on the second day. She said they were in Napa for their anniversary and that she would pass the message along. They did not come. When I opened my eyes on the 4th day, the face looking down at me was not my son's. It was Rebecca's. Rebecca is 45. She was my patient 14 years ago when I was working cardiac care, and she came in for a procedure following a valve problem she'd had since childhood. She was frightened and alone. Her husband was traveling, and she ended up spending 4 days in the hospital. I looked after her. We talked during the long afternoon hours when visitors weren't coming. She told me about her childhood in eastern Tennessee, about her father who worked the mines, about the way fear had followed her since she was a small girl watching her father cough in the kitchen. I told her about Robert, about Tyler being born that same year, about the way new life and the threat of losing life have a way of arriving in the same season. When she left the hospital, she hugged me and said she would not forget me. I thought that was the kind of thing people say when they mean it in the moment but don't carry forward. I was wrong about that. Rebecca and her husband moved to Asheville 3 years ago, and she found me, just like that. Looked me up, showed up at my door with a lemon cake, and said she had been hoping to run into me for a decade. We had dinner that night, and we have had dinner many times since. Rebecca was at the hospital because Dorothy had called her. Dorothy did not have many numbers. She had mine, she had my son's, and she had Rebecca's, because Rebecca had helped me with my garden last spring and had given Dorothy her card in case anything ever needed tending. Dorothy, God bless her, called everyone she had. When I woke up, Rebecca was in the chair beside my bed with dark circles under her eyes and a paperback novel face down in her lap, and she looked at me, the way you look at someone you are enormously relieved is still alive. "You scared me half to death," she said, and her voice broke on the last word. I tried to speak. My throat was dry and strange, and I couldn't quite get the words together at first. The nurse came. There was water, and careful explanations, and a doctor with a calm manner who walked me through what had happened and what came next. The hip repair had gone well. The brain bleed had resolved with intervention. I would need significant rehabilitation. I would likely walk normally again, but it would take time and work. After the doctor left, I asked the question I already half knew the answer to. "Has my son called?" Rebecca's jaw tightened. She looked at the window for just a moment before she looked back at me. "I reached out to him when I found out you were here," she said carefully. "He said he was out of the country and that he'd be in touch." "He hasn't been in touch?" "He sent a text yesterday." Rebecca picked up her phone, held it out to me. The text read, "Thanks for the update. Tell her we're thinking of her and we'll call when we're back in range." "We'll call when we're back in range." I lay there and I read that sentence again. I read it a third time. My son knew his mother had fallen down the stairs, had fractured her hip, had been in surgery for a brain bleed, and he had sent a text that said they'd call when they were back in range. And then he had not called. Dorothy came that afternoon with tulips from her garden and the controlled outrage of a woman who has lived long enough to know exactly what kind of person disappears when their mother is in the ICU. She set the flowers on the windowsill and she looked at me steadily. "He knows," she said. "I spoke to his wife myself." On the second day. She knew it was serious. I was not vague about it. I thanked Dorothy. I thanked Rebecca. I looked at the tulips, and I felt something settle in my chest that was not grief and was not anger yet. It was more like recognition. The recognition of something I had suspected for a long time but had refused to name. My son came on the 6th day. He and Vanessa arrived in the early afternoon while I was doing my first round of physical therapy in the hall outside my room. He looked tan. They both did. Vanessa was carrying a gift bag that turned out to contain a scented candle and a crossword puzzle book, the kind of gift you buy at an airport when you realize you should probably bring something. "Mom." He hugged me, carefully, around the walker. "I'm so sorry. Our phones just weren't working out there. The signal at the Vineyard was basically non-existent." Vanessa nodded in confirmation. "It was truly awful," she said. "We felt so cut off." They had posted to social media 4 times during the days I was unconscious. I had not looked yet, but Rebecca had seen them and shown Dorothy, and Dorothy had told me quietly that morning. I did not bring this up. I just looked at my son and nodded and said I was glad they had made it. They stayed 2 hours. My son asked about the hip and the surgery in a general way, the way you ask about something you want to understand just enough to relay accurately to others. Vanessa talked about the vineyard, the tastings, the cottage they had stayed in, the way the fog came in over the hills in the morning. Tyler had been with my son's in-laws, apparently, and was doing wonderfully. At the end of the 2 hours, my son said he had a development meeting in the morning and needed to get back on the road. He squeezed my hand. He told me I looked good for what I'd been through. He told me to follow the doctor's orders and that they would figure out next steps. "Next steps," I said. He shifted slightly. "Just You know, what you need going forward, recovery-wise. I told him I would be fine. He looked relieved in a way that seemed specific, like a particular concern had been addressed. They left. I sat in the chair by the window and watched the light move across the floor, and I thought about that phrase, next steps. What you need going forward. Rebecca visited again the next morning. She'd been coming every day, bringing food I could actually eat, sitting with me during the afternoon slump when the hospital feels longest. I had started to understand how lucky I was. Not for the fall, but for her. "There's something I want to tell you," she said, and the careful way she said it made me put down my fork. She told me that the week before my fall, she had gotten a call from my son. She hadn't mentioned it before because she didn't know what to make of it, and she hadn't wanted to upset me while I was recovering. But she had been thinking about it. And with what Dorothy had also mentioned, she thought I needed to know. "He called asking how you seemed lately," she said. Not in a worried way, in a specific way. He asked if I'd noticed any confusion, whether you'd mentioned feeling unsafe in the house, whether you ever seemed disoriented about dates or appointments, whether you talked about finances in ways that seemed unclear. I sat with that for a moment. "What did you tell him?" "I told him you were the sharpest person I knew," she said. "I told him you had helped me fix a water pressure problem in my kitchen last fall by walking me through it from memory." He didn't seem satisfied with that. He thanked me and said he was just trying to be proactive about your care. 2 days after that conversation, Dorothy came by the hospital and told me my son had called her as well. Same week, same questions, almost word for word. Dorothy, being Dorothy, had told him in plain terms that I was fine, that I was more competent than most people she knew, and that he ought to call his mother more often instead of calling her neighbors. She was not apologetic about this. 2 women, 2 phone calls, the same questions, the same week, 1 week before I fell. I lay in my hospital bed that night and I turned it over in my mind slowly, the way you work through a differential diagnosis, ruling things out. There was the version where my son was genuinely worried about an aging mother living alone and had clumsy ways of expressing concern. I considered that version for a fair amount of time, the way you give any hypothesis its due. And then I let it go, because I knew my son, and what he had done had the feel of something deliberate, something preparatory. The answer came through the mail. Rebecca had been checking my house, watering the plants, bringing in packages. On the 8th day of my hospital stay, she came in with a manila envelope she had found in my mailbox. Return address: an elder care law firm in Charlotte. She handed it to me carefully. Inside was a document, a petition for limited guardianship. My son was petitioning the court for the authority to manage my finances and medical decisions on the grounds that I showed signs of cognitive decline and was no longer capable of safely managing my own affairs independently. The language was formal and clinical and completely fabricated. It cited concerns from people close to me about memory issues and confusion. It cited an incident, described vaguely, in which I had allegedly been found disoriented in a public place. There was no such incident. It referenced my living situation as presenting ongoing safety risks given my age and condition. It listed my assets, my house, Robert's life insurance payout, my retirement accounts, my savings, all itemized, all attached to the argument that I could no longer manage them myself and required a guardian to do so. My son's attorney had signed the document. It was dated 3 weeks before my fall. He had started this process before I ever hit those stairs. Rebecca sat beside me while I read it twice. When I looked up, she was watching me with an expression I recognized. It was the same expression I had worn, probably, in 31 years of delivering difficult news to families who had not yet understood what they were hearing. "He needed the fall to strengthen the case," I said. My voice came out level, which surprised me. A documented medical emergency, an elderly woman living alone who ended up in the ICU. It would make the petition look a great deal more reasonable. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. "That's exactly what Dorothy and I said to each other last night," she said. I looked at the itemized list of my assets. I looked at my son's name at the top of the petition. I thought about the Napa Valley posts, the 2-hour visit, the scented candle and the crossword puzzle book, the phrase, "next steps," And then something shifted in me, cleanly and permanently, the way a door closes and you hear the latch engage. I was not going to let this happen. From my hospital bed, I called my attorney. Her name is Patricia Holt, and she has handled my affairs since Robert and I first bought the house in Asheville. She is in her late 50s, precise and not easily surprised. I told her everything. The phone calls to Rebecca and Dorothy. The guardianship petition dated 3 weeks before my fall. The Napa Valley timeline. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said exactly what I needed to hear. "Sylvia," she said, using my middle name the way she always did, "I've seen this pattern before, and I want you to know that you have every legal option available to you. Let's use them." She came to the hospital the next day with a yellow legal pad and a look of focused intent. We talked for 2 hours. She had already researched the petition, which had not yet been filed with the court, which meant my son was still gathering material for it, building toward a filing date. We were ahead of it, barely, but ahead. We discussed options. A comprehensive revision of my will. A revocable living trust that would protect my assets during my lifetime and direct them clearly after my death. A formal cognitive evaluation by a neuropsychologist, documented and on record, that would establish my competence beyond any question. And a letter from Patricia to my son's attorney, indicating that I was fully aware of the guardianship petition, that I was represented by counsel, and that any attempt to proceed would be contested vigorously and publicly. "I want to change the will entirely," I told her. "How entirely?" I told her. She wrote it down without blinking. I also asked Patricia to arrange something else. I wanted a family meeting, a formal one, in her office, where I could present what I had found and where my son would have to sit across from me and look at the documents laid out on a table between us and explain what he intended to do. "I want him to understand," I told her, "that I know everything. Give me 2 weeks," she said. I was discharged to a rehabilitation facility for 3 weeks. Rebecca visited every other day. Dorothy came twice a week with food from her kitchen, the kind of food that tasted like someone had actually thought about what you needed. The physical therapy was hard and sometimes painful, and there were afternoons when I lay on the narrow bed in that facility and felt the full weight of what my life had become. 68 years old, my husband gone, my son revealed, my body healing slowly from a fall down my own staircase. Those were the hardest hours. But I got up for every therapy session. I walked the hall every morning, even when it hurt. I did the exercises even when I was tired. I was a nurse for 31 years, and I understood bodies and I understood recovery, and I was not willing to give my son the additional gift of a mother who stopped trying. The cognitive evaluation happened in the second week. A neuropsychologist named Dr. Whitmore came to the facility and administered a full battery of tests. Memory, reasoning, language, executive function, orientation. I finished every section. Dr. Whitmore told me afterward, informally, that my scores were in the range he would expect from someone considerably younger, and that he had rarely administered the test to someone who seemed less in need of it. His formal report arrived 4 days later, and Patricia had it filed and documented before the week was out. I was discharged from the facility on a Thursday in April, 6 weeks after the fall. Rebecca and Dorothy both came to take me home. I walked up my front steps with a cane and the knowledge that I was not the same woman who had walked down them last time. The house felt different. Not smaller, exactly, but cleaner, like something had been swept out of it. I made tea. I sat in the chair by the window where Robert used to read the paper. I looked at the staircase. Then I called Patricia and told her I was ready. The meeting was set for the following Monday at 2 in the afternoon. Patricia had sent a formal notice to my son and his attorney. The letter indicated that I wished to discuss my estate and certain recent legal matters in the presence of my counsel. It was civil and precise and gave nothing away. My son called me Sunday night. His voice had the careful tone of someone who knows a conversation is being navigated. "Mom, I heard from Patricia's office. Is everything okay? There are some things I need to discuss with you in person," I said. "I'll see you tomorrow." A pause. Should I be concerned? "I think that's a reasonable question," I said. When I arrived at Patricia's office Monday afternoon, Rebecca was with me. My son and his wife arrived 10 minutes later with his attorney, a man in his 40s with the practiced expression of someone who expects to manage a difficult old woman. They stopped when they saw Patricia, Rebecca, and the documents already arranged on the conference table. My son looked at me. Then at Rebecca. "Who is she?" "Rebecca is here because I asked her to be," I said. "Please sit down." They sat. His attorney opened a portfolio. "I'd like to begin by clarifying the purpose of this meeting," he said. "My client is simply—" I held up my hand. The attorney stopped. "I'm going to speak first," I said, "and then you can say whatever you'd like." The room was quiet. I had spent 31 years learning how to be steady in rooms where the stakes were very high. I drew on everything I knew. I began with the phone calls. I told my son that I knew he had called Rebecca and Dorothy the week before my fall. I told him what he had asked them. I asked Rebecca to confirm, and she did, in plain, straightforward language, looking directly at my son when she spoke. His wife looked at him. He looked at the table. Then, I opened the manila envelope and slid the guardianship petition across the table. He stared at it. "I know about this," I said. "I know it was drafted 3 weeks before my fall. I know it lists my assets. I know it describes cognitive decline that does not exist and incidents that never happened. I know your attorney was preparing to file it." His attorney leaned forward. "Mrs. Patterson, my client was acting out of genuine concern for—" Patricia cut him off smoothly and completely. "Let her finish." I continued. "I know you were in Napa Valley when I was in the ICU. I know the hospital reached your wife on the second day. I know you posted to social media 4 times while I was unconscious." I looked at Vanessa when I said that, and the color in her face changed. "I have the screenshots. I know you came to the hospital for 2 hours and spent a significant portion of that time talking about the Vineyard. I know you used the phrase next steps in a way that had nothing to do with my medical recovery. And I know that you have been building a case to have me declared incompetent so that you could take guardianship of my finances and my home." My son opened his mouth. I kept going. "I also know that Dr. Whitmore evaluated my cognitive function last week." She pushed a copy of the report across the table. His attorney picked it up. "I know that Patricia has been preparing documents for the past 2 weeks, and I know that you came here today expecting to discuss an inheritance you believed was already yours." The room was very quiet. His attorney looked at the cognitive report. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly. My son finally spoke. His voice was tight. "I was worried about you. You're alone in that house. You're not getting younger. And after Dad died, I just thought—" "You thought what?" I asked. "That the time to establish that I was incapable was before I fell? That collecting testimony from my friends about confusion I didn't have was concern? You filed a legal petition," I said. "You did not call." The attorney tried again. "My client's actions were motivated by—" Patricia's voice was quiet and definitive. "Your client's actions are documented in that petition, which contains material misrepresentations about my client's mental state. We are prepared to challenge every item in it and to make the process as thorough as you'd like. The cognitive evaluation is on record. Mrs. Patterson is in excellent health. The petition will not succeed." My son looked at me across the table. For a moment I saw something I hadn't expected in his face. Not anger, something closer to shame. But it passed. "So what?" he said. "You dragged us here to punish us?" "I dragged you here," I said, "because you deserve to hear it from me directly. Because I am your mother, and I was not willing to let you believe you could do this without being seen." I nodded to Patricia. She opened the new documents. "My will has been revised," I told them. "Completely." Vanessa reached for my son's arm. He didn't move. Patricia began reading. "Tyler's Education Trust. Fully funded, protected, administered independently, unreachable by either of his parents until he turned 18. Rebecca looked startled when Patricia read her name and the figure attached to it. I reached over and touched her hand. She shook her head slightly, blinking hard. Then the charitable bequests. The regional hospital where I had worked for 2 decades. The nursing scholarship fund Robert and I had talked about starting for years but never had. The community garden program downtown, which Tyler had volunteered with twice and which deserved more than it ever received. My son's face was controlled and pale. His attorney cleared his throat. And to your son? Patricia looked up. Nothing, she said. The words sat in the room. Vanessa made a sound. My son was very still. This is because of a vacation, he said finally. His voice was flat and disbelieving. You're punishing us for one trip. I leaned forward slightly. No. I'm recognizing a pattern. There's a difference, I told him then. Not in anger, but clearly and completely. The Christmas when Tyler was 4 and they canceled 3 days before, the first Christmas after Robert died, when I had the house ready and the food bought and a gift for Tyler wrapped under the tree. The birthday dinners I had driven to Charlotte for, where Vanessa was on her phone and my son left early for work calls. The Sunday voicemails that became texts, that became silence. The way Tyler barely knew my face because his parents had kept him at a careful distance from me for reasons I was only now beginning to fully understand. I missed your father's last months, I told him. You came to the funeral for 2 days and then you went back to work. I didn't say anything. I thought it was grief. I thought you were coping. I made that excuse for a long time. His eyes moved away from mine. You have not included me in Tyler's life. You have answered my calls with texts, and my texts with nothing. Last Christmas you told me you had other plans without asking whether I had plans, without asking whether I minded, without asking anything at all. And while I was in the hospital, you were posting photographs of yourself enjoying a vacation you had clearly been planning for months, during which time you were also arranging legal paperwork to take away my independence and my home. I paused. I am 68 years old. I am not declining. I am not confused. I am not unsafe. I am a woman who raised you, who loved you, who drove to Charlotte for every birthday and called every Sunday and kept trying long after you had made it clear you were done trying back. And when I needed you, you were not there. The silence was total. My son said nothing. Vanessa said nothing. His attorney clicked his pen once and then was still. Tyler has a trust, I said. When he is 18, he will have the resources for any education he wants, and his parents will have no access to those funds before that time. That is for him. Everything else I have given to people and organizations that showed up when I needed them. I stood up. Patricia stood with me. Rebecca stood. The meeting is finished, I said. My son stood as well. At the door, he turned back. His voice was very quiet and very careful. You'll be alone, he said. You'll need us eventually. I looked at him for a long moment. I have been alone for years, I said. The difference now is that I chose it. The door closed. The weeks after were not simple. My son called several times. Vanessa called once, crying, which I did not expect, and I listened quietly and then told her that I wished them both well and that I hoped they would be kinder to their son than they had been to me. The calls tapered off. I did not return most of them. What I did instead was heal. I finished my rehabilitation. I returned to my garden, slowly and carefully, a few minutes at a time. Dorothy brought seedlings. Rebecca came on Saturdays and we worked the beds together, her hands in the soil and mine, and we talked about things that had nothing to do with any of this, which was its own kind of medicine. I called the hospital where I had worked and offered to volunteer in the patient education program, talking with cardiac patients about recovery. They said yes immediately. I started the following month. Being useful, I discovered, was a more reliable antidepressant than anything else I'd tried. 5 weeks after the meeting in Patricia's office, there was a knock at my front door on a Saturday afternoon. I opened it and found Rebecca standing on the porch holding a small hand. Tyler looked up at me with his grandfather's eyes, round and dark and full of absolute uncomplicated trust. "Hi," he said. I said hello, very carefully, because I did not trust my voice. Rebecca explained later, after he had eaten 2 of my oatmeal cookies and fallen asleep in Robert's old chair with a picture book open on his chest, that she had reached out to a mutual acquaintance, that Tyler had been asking about me in ways his parents were not addressing, and that she had simply arranged a visit with enough surrounding circumstances that it was difficult to object to. She was not apologetic about this, and I did not ask for details. He had brought something. Before he fell asleep, he pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket and held it out to me. "Get well, Grandma," it said, in the tall, uneven letters of a child who has just mastered handwriting. A drawing underneath, two stick figures, one small and one tall, standing in front of what might have been a garden or might have been a house. "He told me he made it when I was in the hospital," Rebecca said quietly. "His parents never sent it." I folded it very carefully, and I put it on the refrigerator when Tyler was asleep, and I stood in my kitchen for a long time looking at it. He has visited 4 times since then. Each time Rebecca brings him or arranges the bringing with a practicality that asks no permission, it doesn't absolutely need to. Each time he leaves a small piece of himself behind in the house, a drawing, a plastic dinosaur forgotten on the windowsill, a half-eaten pack of crackers in the pantry that I have not thrown away. It is now late summer. My garden is producing more tomatoes than I know what to do with, which is the exact problem every good garden creates. My hip is fully healed. I walk 2 miles in the mornings, alone, through the neighborhood where Robert and I walked for 20 years, and I notice things I stopped noticing when I was too busy trying to keep a relationship alive that had already decided to die. I am planning a trip to the Pacific Northwest. Portland, the coast, the redwoods. I have never been. Robert always wanted to go, and we always said next year, and then there were no more next years, which is something I think about and then decide to stop thinking about, because that particular grief is clean and true, and I have made my peace with it. The trip is for me. Just me. The plane ticket is on my refrigerator next to Tyler's drawing, and sometimes I stand in my kitchen and look at both of them and feel something I don't have a perfect word for. Not happiness exactly. Something more durable than that. Something that has survived a fall down a staircase and a guardianship petition and a son who chose a Vineyard over an ICU and is still here, still standing, still putting things on the refrigerator and planting things in the garden and getting on planes. People tell you that family is blood, that you keep trying no matter what, that a mother's love is unconditional and should be met with loyalty in return. I believed all of that for a very long time. I believed it past the point where the evidence had stopped supporting it. I believed it into the year that my son began collecting testimony about my supposed decline. I believed it right up to the moment I read a legal petition listing my assets with my son's name at the top. I don't believe it anymore. Not the unconditional part, not the way I used to. I believe that love is a choice you make every day, and that blood is one of the least reliable predictors of whether someone will make it. I believe that family is the woman who drives to the hospital because she noticed your porch light was still on. It is the neighbor who shows up with tulips and a particular kind of steady anger on your behalf. It is the former patient who sleeps in an uncomfortable chair because she decided 14 years ago when she was frightened and alone that she would not forget you. I am 68 years old. I survived the fall. I survived the surgery. I survived finding out what my son had been planning and what he thought of me and how little he had believed I would ever find out. I am still here. I am harder to fool than I used to be and softer in the right places and going to Portland in October. Tyler is coming to see me next Saturday, and I am making oatmeal cookies and buying a new set of dinosaur figures that I found at a store downtown, because a boy who falls asleep in his grandfather's chair with a picture book deserves a grandmother who pays attention to what he loves. I paid attention once to the wrong person for too many years. I know better now. And if there is someone listening to this who has been doing what I was doing, making yourself smaller, waiting for someone to finally see you, excusing the inexcusable because the alternative felt like losing something you couldn't bear to lose, I want you to hear this. You are not losing anything that was really yours to begin with. What you are losing was already gone. What is still here is you. And that is, as it turns out, quite a lot. For more stories about families, boundaries, and the quiet courage it takes to choose yourself, please subscribe to Crystal Revenge. And if this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. You never know whose porch light you might be noticing from across the street.